it's a positive film. It has heroes and villains, and that it essentially is a fun movie to watch. It's been a long time since people have been able to go to the movies and see a sort of straightforward, wholesome, fun adventure.
Well, it's a fantasy. It's not science fiction so much as it is space fantasy. And it's about people. It's finally about people and not finally about science.
The story, when you actually put it into words, is only so much nonsense to hang a great visual experience onto. It's the stuff that fairy tales are made of.
Sort of boiling down religion into a very basic concept. The fact that there is some deity or some power or some force that sort of controls our destiny works for good and also works for evil.
Marvelous, healthy innocence. Great pace, wonderful to look at, full of guts, nothing unpleasant. I mean, people go bang bang and people fall over and are dead, but, no horrors. A sort of wonderful freshness about it, kind of like wonderful fresh air.
It's got whatever you want it to be. It's pure entertainment. It's like a roller coaster ride, and it can be interpreted as long as you enjoy it, which is the intention.
Hello and welcome back to Generation Skywalker. I'm Dan, and in this episode we're going to be taking a look at a bit of a rediscovered relic. So back in July 2023 at the Farthest From toy show in Fordingbridge, Palitoy designer Bob Brechin gave a fantastic talk on the history of Palitoy from a Star Wars perspective. Straight from someone who was there designing the toys and living the day-to-day reality of Palitoy, which Generation Skywalker were there to record and share with you now. So to give this recording some context, Bob was there at Farthest From promoting his book My Palitoy Story, written and developed with Brian Hickey, and it would be released later that year. Brian then went on to produce, of course, Total Star Wars Toys, the Palitoy Saga, which we've been talking about recently on the show, and that was released earlier this year, and to which Bob also contributed. Both of these books are available now on totaltoybooks.com to purchase. For me, on a personal note, this Farthest From was also special because I had already written the show notes for the first episode of the Guide to Palitoy and had them with me at the show, and with them able to draft in John Aves and David Tree to be in part of it. So the rest is history. The first instalment of the Palitoy Guide came out in November of that year, and to date we've released 5 episodes, and all being well, a 6th episode isn't too far away. So this recording was originally meant to go into one of the 3 original Palitoy Guide episodes, but they were already absolutely crammed. We just couldn't shut Dave Tree up about Action Man.
Action Man from Palitoy.
And then, in a truly professional move, I completely forgot I had this recording until recently. So what you're about to hear is Bob's talk from the day. It's a live recording from the event, so the audio isn't perfect, but what it does have is a living legend in toy design's first-hand insight, personal stories, and loads of context you just won't get anywhere else. So think of this as a little time capsule from Farthest From July 2023, the last ever Farthest From summer show, if I'm not mistaken. I'll hand you over now to Dave Tree as he introduces you to Bob Brechin, and we'll be back with a new episode in the not too distant future. We are Generation Skywalker, all eras, all passions, all Star Wars.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming down to Farthest From. Today, you've got an absolute golden opportunity to have your mind blown. We've got Bob Brechin, who's come down for the first time for Farthest From. He's been down before for Roll Out Roll Pool. But for those who are not familiar, Bob is an absolute legend in British toy design. We're all here for Star Wars, but we probably had lots of other toys that we played with as kids. And still play with now. And Bob has a huge, long, varied history in contributing to multiple toy brands. So to us, he's one of the guys, one of the team behind the cardboard Death Star. We were like Star Wars. But to an Action Man collector, is there any Action Man guys here? Oh, So to action. Oh, there you go. But to Action Man, guys, he is the gripping hand. So that was sculpted on Bob's own hand, and he's the designer of that. And to Action Man collectors, he's affectionately known as the Hand of Bob, which is like fantastic. For Action Force, he was the lead designer for like Action Force, so that's the scaled down Star Wars scale versions of like Action Man, and that's hugely popular as well. But Tressie, Tiny Tears, Bob has had like a lot of input into and a great influence on toy design. He's just recently had a very successful Kickstarter, My Palitoy Story, which is with Brian Hickey. So again, people who come along to Roll Out Roll Call will be familiar with Action Force, the Battle Years book, and the Hasbro Year book. Brian has teamed up with Bob to produce this book. Although the Kickstarter is over, you can still pre-order copies of the books through the links on the QR code there, so you can scan that so you can get a hold of pre-order a book for when that's out. Bob has put together a whole new presentation on Star Wars. So he's going to go through the contribution that Palitoy did, which is the British toy company that distributes Star Wars toys in the UK in the 70s and 80s. And some of this is all from working on the book. And he's going to be talking about his perspective as one of the designers. Big round of applause for Bob, please.
Well, what a lead in. I don't know if you noted my T-shirt, but I'm from the National Forest, which is Leicestershire and Derbyshire. So it's one forest to another. Let's get into it. As Dave said, I was chief designer at Palitoy for many years. I joined Palitoy in '67 and I left in '84. So I'm going to talk to you about Star Wars. First of all, I want to tell you how the company was founded and how it developed. Episode 1. The prequel, the history of Palitoy. Palitoy started in 1919. It was in Leicester, and it was by this guy called Alfred Edward Pallet. You know where the name Palitoy comes from now. He called it Casseroid. His first toy was this windmill made out of celluloid. You've seen those at the seaside. First made in 1920, and it was last sold in 1964. And the next slide shows the first doll, which was made in 1925, called Diddums. And it was after little characters by this woman, Mabel Lucy Atwell. So it's one of the first early examples of character merchandise. So that was the first doll. That was made in celluloid as well. He developed all sorts of little dolls, all made in celluloid, little Cupid dolls as they were called and what have you. And that went on till 1930s. In 1931, he took an offer he couldn't refuse, and he got bought out by Bakelite Xyloline Limited, which was a big plastics concern in Britain. And because they had a lot of money, they built him a new factory in Leicester on Abbey Lane. So more money means more research and development. So before that, he was designing a toy, or he was a bit of a lad actually. He used to pinch ideas and make a toy out of it. You get a bit of money, but you'd have to plough that money back into another toy that he was coming out with. But this company had a lot of money behind them, so it started to really take off then. And then 1935, they thought, all these toys we're developing, it needs to have a name, hence Palitoy Playthings, after Alfred Edward Pallet. They had to wait about a couple of years because they found that there was a village in India called Pali. So they had to find out whether there was a toy company there to see if anybody was making toys called Palitoy. And they found that there wasn't, so they were able to do that. So 2 years later, they were expanding quite a lot in Leicester, so they wanted more manufacturing outlets. So they came to Colville in Leicestershire, which is, the name tells you, it's a coal mining town. And there was a lot of women there. The men were down underground, and women were looking for jobs. So this building it used to be a dance hall, a boxing ring, a billiard hall, and they bought that, and that's where the first dolls were made. Now these were called soft body dolls, and they had plastex heads on, which are foam plastic. And that was the first time the Palitoy Plaything logo was used, when the toys were being made in 1937 in Colville. Now, when they bought that building, they bought 3.5 acres behind. You can see the old building on the left there, and that's the factory they built in 1938. It looks like that today. It still stands there. The blue one is the old factory that they bought in 37. The red one is the factory they built in 38 behind it. And then it grew and grew and grew, and it still looks like that today. It still looks exactly the same as when we left in 1984. Second World War came along. Now, we know what war does. It creates new manufacturing processes and new materials and all sorts of things. So after the war, injection molding came along. They took one of the first, I think it was the first injection molding machine before the war, ironically from Germany. It was the first highly industrialised machine. Before that, they used a plunger to plunge plastic through into something, to very, very simple way of injection moulding. But they started moulding vehicles and planes, and then another process came along, which is blow moulding. After the war, my boss, Bill Pugh, who joined in 47, he went with a delegation to America to look at new materials and new processes. And they came across this blow moulding process. And all it could blow was little 2-inch diameter plastic bottles. There was only one machine, and it was on show. And they said, can you build another one, send it to Britain? And they did. And it came to Castleroyd in Leicester. And it started, after that, they started designing other things. The first thing was that teddy bear, which was a talcum powder container. Do you remember the Jif Lemon? So the Jif Lemon came from Castleroyd. It was made by a company called Hacks, but my boss, well, he didn't actually sculpt it. One of my colleagues did, Stuart Moore, but it was under Bill Pugh's direction. But they moulded all sorts of things, squeezy bottles. These things, these big blue things, are things for chemicals. They're called carboys. But you could also blow mould dolls. So they started blow moulding dolls. All of this gave them the name, the House of Constant Progress by the press. And it's because of all these new materials, new processes, new products, which got them that name. In the 50s, Tiny Tears was, somebody mentioned they had a Tiny Tears, they came around the table, but that came later. But in the 50s, they developed PVC, and it got into the Daily Mirror because it was the first doll to be made in PVC. And because of PVC, you could punch, because it's a soft material, it wasn't hard like the previous plastics, it was soft and squidgy, you could punch needles into the plastic. So they developed a way of putting hair in. So all the dolls you see now with hair in, which is nylon filaments, it all came from this. And because it was stitched into the head, you could wash it, shampoo it, comb it, and everything. Before that, they used to paint the hair. They'd mould it into the head and paint it, or they'd get a wig and stick it on. Of course, if you wash that, it would come off. So she was a doll of the century. During the 50s, they lost a bit of control over the toys. It was getting a bit stale, and they wanted to boost the toys. And they got this guy in called Miles Fletcher to do that in 62. And they said to him, get over to Colville and transform the Palitoy brand. So what did he do? Next slide shows Bob Simpson, who was managing director right through the 70s into the 80s. He was marketing at Castleroyd. So the two of them went over to Colville and set up there. And they took two other guys, which was the sales manager, which is Harry Trowell, and Bill Pugh, my boss. So they set up at Colville, and they were sort of living in wooden shacks for a while until they built some brick buildings. Now, this is the period when these three toys came out. It was the time of TV advertising. It was just coming into its fore. So Miles Fletcher thought, we need toys that you can advertise on TV because it's going to be big, TV advertising. And they wanted dolls that were going to sell, obviously. And Barbie was the big seller of the time. That came out in 59. And the first doll he got was Tressie on the left from the American Character Doll Company. Now, her hair grows, so if you get hold of the hair here and pull it, it comes out of her head, so it's long. And then you can wind it back in again. So you could do different hairstyles. That was in 64. And that went on TV. That was the first TV doll that went on for Palitoy. I believe the first TV advert for a toy was Meccano, and the first doll was Cindy, and then Palitoy came out with Tressie. Tiny Tears came from the same company. It's a drinking, crying and wetting doll. You squeeze her tummy and she wets a nappy, and little tears come out of her eyes. That was sculpted by my colleague Stuart Moore, and then that was 65. She was Doll of the Year for 3 years running when she came out. Action Man, 66, you know all about Action Man, came from Hasbro. We organised a licence to take it, and of course we wanted a different name than G.I. Joe, and there's a big story about the name of Action Man. It goes on forever, so I won't bore you with that. So those are the three toys that really made Palitoy and made people think, oh, this is a toy company here. Well, it wasn't a toy company, it was a toy brand. It was a toy brand of Castleroyd. Now, Morris Fletcher had been given the remit to build up this toy brand. Now, when it was built up by these three toys, Castleroy decided, well, it wasn't Castleroy, it was BXL, decided to sell the brand. Before Tressie came out, it was a £300,000 turnover brand. When they finished with Tressie, Tiny Tears and Action Man, it was worth £3 million in turnover. I don't know, perhaps that's the reason why they decided to sell the toy brand, but they were really concentrating on their more industrial products like these blow-molded bottles, and they were getting into tube making and other plastic things like plastic film and stuff like that. So they probably thought that toys didn't really fit in with what they were doing. That was probably the reason they decided to sell. General Mills, we all know General Mills, they came in. They had a little unit looking for new possibilities in other products, because they were a food company. They started off as just one mill in 1878 or something like that. And they grew and grew and grew. They became a big food company doing retail food like Betty Crocker, Cheerios and stuff like that. But they had this venture group, always looking for new ideas of where they could spend their money and buy companies. And they decided to get into toys. Of course, they bought Kenner. The first company they bought was people that made Play-Doh, and that Play-Doh went into Kenner range. Of course, Parker Brothers, the game company. So in 1968, they bought Palitoy, and that was the Palitoy logo then. So they were venturing into Europe, starting to get bigger. In the 70s, somebody stood here, said it was a golden decade for toys. You can see at the top Action Man, it got the 10-year Golden Award and the Toy of the Decade. Dolls, there was Tiny Tears, but there was Action Girl and Pippa and Girls World. Games, we developed Striker, which is a football game where you tap the little football on the head and he kicks the ball. Mainline Railways, we developed from scratch, all the development, and action figures from Mego, things from Tomy, Discovery Time, and then something big came at the end of that decade. Episode 2, the beginning. How did Palitoy get Star Wars? So Hasbro didn't want it because they got Action Man. Oh no, they got G.I. Joe. We have Action Man. Mattel, they got Barbie. Mego, they got all their figures, action figures. The real reason they didn't want them, in those days, people didn't want to do toys of films. And the reason was because if the film bombs out, you're left with toys on the shelf. That was the reason. But this guy, Bernie Loomis, he thought the film was toyetic. You know that word, don't you? Toyetic. He was the one who did Hot Wheels for Mattel. And of course, he brought in $6 Million Man. But you can see the possibility of Star Wars, as you know. So General Mills Toy Group. We were part of this toy group, backed by the General Mills Corporation, which is a £2 billion organisation. Loads of money. So we got lots of money behind bringing out this Star Wars phenomenon. There were toy companies in the USA, Canada and Australia. European toy companies in the toy group was us in UK. There was Miro Macar in France, there was Germany, there was Spain, there was Benelux. So there's plenty of opportunities to push Star Wars through Europe. There were some internal issues at Palitoy. Where to place it? There were three trading divisions it could possibly go in. There was Dennis Fisher, which was bought by General Mills, and became part of Palitoy in 1971. But of course they had $6 Million Man from Kenner, and that was really big. And they were expecting to do Man from Atlantis the next year, so they didn't want it. There was Bradgate Wholesale Division, which is part of Palitoy, but just selling to the wholesale trade. And Les Cook, who was marketing director, that's where he wanted to put it, because he didn't want to step on the toes of Action Man. But there's the retail division, which is the main division of Palitoy, which is selling Action Man, Tiny Tears, Pippa, Tressie and all those. But Bernie Loomis, when he came over, he said, you've got to put Star Wars in the retail division and the wholesale Action Man and be a major force for the next 20 years. Bit short-sighted there, I think, but never mind, carry on. So it went to the retail sales division eventually, and that's the cover, as you know. Episode 3. It was very nearly the end for Palitoy with Star Wars, for many reasons. Of course, the movie was released in May 1977. All production was going to go to Kenner, obviously, when it started. They had the early bird certificate packs to help that along. In the UK, the background was we had no US sales data because they weren't selling anything. There was no US playtesting or VOPAN. Do you know what VOPAN is? It's part of playtesting where it's called voice pitch analysis, where they they record whoever's playing with it, and from their voices they can work out whether they're interested or not. So we had none of that. There was no US audience reaction yet to the movie. There's no movie in the UK until late December, and we had no samples or stock. So we had to try and sell this to trade, that this new product line was coming along. Of course, there was no Toys R Us until 1985. Argos had only 5 stores in the 70s. The major retailers were Woolworths and Boots, and there was a stronger independence than today, which are small shops. Now, the UK trade resistance, as I said, they were a bit adverse to take space-related toys. Space was quite good in the 50s with Dan Dare and stuff like that, but people lost interest in space until Star Wars came along. They didn't, as I said, they didn't like concepts linked to movies because, movie bombs out and you got to sell them through markets, or they didn't really like 3 3/4 figures at the time. Plus, we tried to sell them the early birds concept, but they wouldn't take it. When you're launching a new product, you get to think to get everything ready, you aim, and then you fire. But we weren't ready. We haven't really got anything to aim at. We're still not ready, but we fired anyway. Episode 4, The Star Wars Fights Back. Only one man could save the day. Any offers?
He's giving it away.
Oh, he's turned it over. He's turned it over. Action Man, save the day. Still the #1 UK boys' toys. So what they did, they gave extra incentives to retailers to force Star Wars distribution. So if they bought so many cartons of Action Man, at a reduced price, they'd have to take the Star Wars. And that's the way we got in, to start with. There was an advertising breakthrough. You probably know all about this. There were cinema displays, cinema tagged advertising where, you put adverts on the cinema for the local shops, so you got a link. And there was a strong PR presence. We had a PR company called Monroe Dayton, and they did great work in PR to get Star Wars moving. And this is one thing that happened. I think this is the 5 millionth Star Wars figure which arrived at Heathrow Airport. That's Jeff Maisie with Darth Vader. And what they did, they went down to Heathrow Airport to try and film this actually in the airport. But the authorities said you've got to wear high-vis jackets if you come on here. You can imagine Darth Vader with a high-vis jacket. So what they did, they went round the back and they found a gap in the fence. So they actually went through this gap, found this bit of rough land, and said, "This is the 5 millionth figure arriving with Darth Vader at Heathrow Airport." I wonder how many people believe that. Episode 5, Grand Designs. Now this is where I come in, and all my colleagues at Palitoy. There's the design, or part of the design team, with me on the right-hand side. This is about 4 years before Star Wars came out. Bill Pugh next to me, Stuart Moore designed Tiny Tears, the model maker Alan Blanchard, Ivor Edmonds, who did lots of Action Man designs, and the lady on the end was the seamstress that would design, well, we shouldn't design it, she'd take the designs from the designers and then sew them up with prototype outfits and for dolls and Action Man and Tressie and all those sort of things. So that was the team at the time. Now, Jeff Maisie, I mentioned, he came up to me one day, said, "Go down and see this film it's come over," and he gave me a couple of tickets. That's I still got that ticket. That was down on Tottenham Court Road, the Dominion, a special showing in October time. So I went down to see that, and I decided I'm going to get there early, get a great seat about 2/3 back in the middle, because something's going to happen here. And then when I saw that writing go over and the spaceship go over, it just blew my mind. And then the next month, we went over to Kenner. That's Roger Morrison, who's the tooling manager at Palitoy. We went over together to Kenner. At that time, they were just getting the first shots from the injection moulding tools for the vehicles. I had the camera, and I said to Roger, "Just hold that, Roger, and take a photograph." So I took a photograph of all the vehicles, but I didn't get him to take a photograph of me holding it. That's unfortunate. So we went to Fundamentals as well and see what they were doing with the die cast. So that's how I went into the catalogue. Now, we couldn't get the Land Speeder or the X-Wing fighter, so Roger had to go out and get tooling in this country made, and we moulded that in companies in the West Midlands, and the moulders were shipped into the factory to be assembled. The TIE fighter, we borrowed the tooling for that. Roger did a bit of cheeky changes to the Land Speeder and got rid of the moving hood is it in America? and we took out the electronics out of the X-Wing. Now, this great big thing, which I always describe as a segment of an orange cut in half and stood on its flat end. It looks a bit like something that's from the Death Star after it's been destroyed. Very, very big tooling. We didn't take that over because we designed this thing here, if you move on. That original idea came from our agency in London, Colin Belding, they were called. They must have had a lad in the studio, a young lad who decided he wanted to get in on the Star Wars act, and he mocked up this rough Death Star basically in card, but you couldn't make it. I mean, the corridor you see on the left-hand slide, it's very complicated to make, so we had to simplify things like that and add other things, and this is the one we made. You can see there. We put in the trash compactor, and we put stormtroopers on the walls, so if kids didn't have many stormtroopers, there was one or two lying around, and we put the gun emplacement on the top, and we put that chute in down to the injection molded chute where the figures go down into the trash compactor, and we had to make it so a child could put it together. And we also designed it so there's two, you know how it goes together, there's two pieces go together and you've got this central column, and Brian Turner had the idea of putting a mirror at the bottom to give that sense of depth. We had to go through this agency, and they had to go through 20th Century Fox to get all this approved. Long-winded process that was. And then we got the artwork back, and you've heard of the name Dave Barnacle. He was given the job of doing the packaging artwork for this, but he also printed off a lot of copies, and we stuck them onto a white card for samples for the salesman, and to go, I think must have been the one that went in the toy fair as well. So that was our big sort of impact on Star Wars. We redesigned some of these other things, the play sets, because we wanted to make them to suit the British market, which is smaller obviously than the American market. So instead of injection molding tooling, they were vacuum formed, as you know, with a card on the base to give it a bit more rigidity. But we did design that in the cantina. We did design that, what we called the fighting stand. The two stands together with two little levers. That was my idea, because polypropylene it's made of, and polypropylene has a property where you can design a hinge in it. And once it comes out of the tool, you have to go like that, and all the molecules line up in one way across the hinge. So it makes it very difficult to break the hinge. So that was a neat little idea. And it made it, give it more play value, because you could move it around, whereas the Kenner one, I think they had, was it 2 or 3 little circles, and you moved little levers. So they were always in the same place, whereas ours could move around the cantina. We had to reduce the droid factory a lot to get the price point. And of course we couldn't put in that little cave thing on the Jarwad set, because you can't do that in vacuum forming. This is an idea I worked on. Before this, we had this product called Salvo, which was a battleship game, and it was based on the Etch-a-Sketch principle. You know Etch-a-Sketch, where you turn 2 knobs and there's a stylus underneath and it draws and gives you pictures. We changed it so that instead of having the stylus, you've got a bulb, and when you press a button, the light shines up, so you blow the destroyer or the frigate out of the water in Salvo, and it seemed natural to transform that into Star Wars, so that's what we did. So it was Destroy Death Star. So that was a design I did. Episode 6, The Galaxy Expands. So The Empire Strikes Back comes out. What year was that? 80, yeah. We had we had a bit of a dispute then, because we had acquired Chad Valley in 1978 when Star Wars toys came out. Bob Simpson, the UK MD, he was tasked by General Mills, or the toy group, to boost Chad Valley up. So he decided to put Star Wars into Chad Valley. So the Chad Valley catalogue for that year was Star Wars. There was pressure from the UK marketing team to place it back with Palitoy, because they said it's not going to sell in Chad Valley. They haven't got the same kudos as Palitoy. They're more of a preschool type of company. Jeff Maisie said they should have put in other products like Play-Doh and stuff like that to boost them, rather than Star Wars, because Star Wars needed the backing of Palitoy to really sell. So it was including a toy fair stand with that catalogue, so the salesman had to use the Chad Valley Star Wars catalogues to sell from. Episode 7, Growing Pains. growing European distribution. Now, we had to use Canadian, English and French packaging for part of the French and British distribution. We had to use over-stickering for Germany and Spain. And we also had to we needed to comply with German restrictions on packs, which is, they were very anti-military and violence in Germany. We had a big problem with Action Man and products like that over there. This is a time when they realised that Star Wars was probably the first global brand, because the film had gone around the world, toys were going around the world, so they started thinking more European-wise. There was a need to move to European multilingual packaging at that time. Move on. And there was massive logistics issues, because when they were designing packaging, it had to go right through all to London, over to America, it'd come back to London, and it'd come back again. There was times when the things were changed and they got it wrong and all sorts of things like that. That was issues with the Lucasfilm approvals. The toy group decided they wanted one company in Europe to be the main centre for marketing, and it was down to Palitoy or Miro Meccano in France. They decided to come over, the Americans, to for the two companies to do a presentation to try and win that sort of contract. They didn't want to come to Colville, obviously, coal mining town, so they decided to have it in Paris, in, what's that big hotel in Paris, the George V, is it? Posh hotel, they had it in there. So Jeff did his presentation. In those days, there was no PowerPoint or anything like that. Everything was on slide, so you had a carousel with all your slides put in the right position in the carousel, and then you have to put it onto a projector to project onto a screen like this. So Jeff did his presentation, went great. The French guy, his equivalent, he got up and he lifted up his carousel, and all the slides fell all over the floor. And Bernie Loomis, I think he just threw an ashtray at the wall and got the next plane back to America, and Palitoy got the contract to be the centre of marketing. So if we move on now, The Return of the Jedi, June 1983. That's when he started seeing these pre-printed multilingual packs and leaflets. Well, the movie came out in the summer, didn't it, Jedi? But we had our toy fairs in January. So you've got to sell to the trade without knowing what's coming out in the film. So we weren't allowed to show new characters. So if you move on, so there's the catalogue, as you know, with a big black blob, and the next. So when the film came out, there was Jabba the Hutt. So you can see the problems marketing had in selling, with not knowing what characters were coming or what the film was going to be like or anything like that. Episode 8, Star Wars in Peril, the end of the trilogy. So no new films were proposed, as you know. How to continue the brand, all this. The power of the Force. So what do? They just took all the characters and put them into the power of the Force for 85. So I think some new ones got in, some new characters that weren't in before, and there's some of the vehicles that went in. Episode 9, In Another Galaxy, Far, Far Away. This is where I come in. Back in 79, the year after we came out with Star Wars toys, Action Man was having a real tough time. So what did? We put him into space. We thought we need a baddie as well, so black seemed a good colour. So we had the Space Rangers and Captain Zargon. So that was designed by Greg Hughes, who was a great designer at Palitoy. But the real problem was the size. Action Man at that time, it had 39 different parts in it and different operations to put it all together. I mean, that character there, how many parts has he got? He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Does his head move? If his head moves, he's got 7 parts. And the only thing you have to do is lay everything into a nest and get a sonic welding horn, come down and go beep, and it's welded. So you can see the problem. 3 3/4 inch figures were here to stay, and larger figures like this were on the way out. What we did was come up with Action Force in 82 and brought that out. So it started off as mini Action Men. Mike Taylor, who was marketing manager at the time, came into my office and said this is what they wanted to do. I wanted to do something different, something more fantasy, but he said we want to carry it on as Action Man, so we want to do the 12 best selling Action Man outfits as the figures. So that's what we did. But he had gone, and Bob Simpson had gone, and all the marketing team had gone in 82. So when this new managing director came in called Peter Waterman, and the new marketing team came in with him. They wanted to do something different, and they wanted to do the fantasy. So that's when we came up with Baron Ironblood and the Red Shadows and 4 teams of Action Force in conflict. All of us at Palitoy started working on this, but they didn't give us any money for tooling, so we had to take the figures, mix and match the legs and arms and heads, and make up different figures and do them in different colours. Episode 10, I got a bad feeling about this. I think that's a quote from Star Wars. Was it Han Solo? Yeah. Action Man yields to the Force. So Action Man was having a tough time. We got a company called Raffer and Page to design some fantastic vehicles, but they were too expensive, and they should have come out in about 72, 73 really, because Action Man was having a tough time. My boss at the time was a chap called John Hawkes, and he tried to get Toy Group to put the money up, and they would do it. So what we did, we took all the Action Man vehicles and figures and stuff, and we sort of did a new concept, and it was shown at Toy Fair, and there's some of the, on a nice diorama. They decided to get rid of Action Man and send the license back to Hasbro, so it was discontinued. And then about 4 months after that happened, in August of '84, we were made redundant, so all the designers, the whole design department was closed down. Action Force continued, but they didn't do any new development. They just bought in G.I. Joe figures, didn't even recolour them, just in G.I. Joe horrible muddy brown colours. Just packaged them in Palitoy and did that for a year. And of course, later on, things like Mask came out. Global branding. Now, as I said, this range of toys was the first real global brand of toys. It caused Toy Group in America to Europeanise the operation. Things they were coming out with are things like this: Strawberry Shortcake, Care Bears, and they were trying to force them into European markets. They had a job with Care Bears in Germany because they were much more expensive than Stife Bears. They still pushed them through. Now, '85 at Palitoy, they were still trying to sell Star Wars, and they had £3 million for marketing support in '85 to push Star Wars through. Just before that time it was, I think it was about '82. The BBC came to the factory at Coalville, and they called Coalville a gold mine on top of a coal mine, because that's what it was. But within a year or two, the gold mine was going and the coal mine was going. And what happened to the gold mine? And what happened to Kenner? And so on. And it's all to do with this, the great video games crash of 1982. Back in the late 70s, video games are really big in the arcades in America and elsewhere. And the toy companies, including Kenner and Parker Brothers, they thought, yeah, we can do toys. So they decided that they were going to get into video games, but make the video games, but not the machines. So what they did, they engineered other companies' machines so they could design the games to go in their machines. And that was all done legally. So that was in 1981, and video games really took off. And what happened was everybody came into the market, and all the crappy stuff from the Far East and stuff like that. And there was a crash because of this, and that was in '83. So when it came to the end of '84, they found out that they'd lost about $10 million because of this crash. And the General Mills shareholders, which were used to getting their food, it brings a nice return if you've got shares in food, because you get a nice steady return every year. But toys, as you know, is like this. If you haven't got a good toy, you're dead, you know. If you've got a good toy, you're on the up. And they got a bit worried with this toy company. It lost $10 million because of this video games episode. So they decided that they want to get out of toys. So what do? They spun the Toy Group off as Kenner Parker in New York Stock Exchange in November 1985. It was quite tax efficient to do it that way, apparently. But the thing is, all the Kenner Parker and the General Mills people that had shares, they got equivalent shares as well. So it was Kenner Parker. So at Palitoy, the Palitoy sign came down and Kenner Parker came up. So the factory was still working. Very limited though, but it's more of a distribution centre then. So in 1985, it became Kenner Parker. 1987, Tonka bought it, and they borrowed loads and loads of money from the banks to buy it, and they were smaller than Ken Barker, but they managed to buy it. It was the Friday before Black Monday, so straight away they lost money, and they carried on for a few years until Hasbro bought it in 1991 for about half of what they paid for it. So Hasbro now owned Tonka stuff, Kenneth Parker stuff, Palitoy stuff, everything. They carried on with the factory of Colville, using it as a distribution centre. The only thing that was being made there was Play-Doh as a toy. Everything else was being imported, and they closed the factory in 1994, and they sent the Play-Doh machine down to Waterford in Republic of Ireland, and they sold the warehouse, which was in Ashby-de-la-Zouch nearby. Episode 11, Save the Rebellion, Save the Dream. So Hasbro, now the owners of Star Wars license, what did they do when they got it? They brought out the power of the Force with those muscular figures, didn't they? Oh, I didn't like them. And then the films started coming out, new century. And then Disney got hold of the license and they started bringing films out a bit later. And then the 40th anniversary. Now this, I suppose most of you have been to this show of Matt Fox. That was on in Leicester, and I saw it was on in that year, the 40th anniversary year. And I contacted him and said, when it's over at Leicester, bring it up the road to Colville, which is only half an hour away. So he did. So this is us setting it up. There's Matt. Stuart Warburson, who's Secretary of Colville Heritage Society, and myself being interviewed by Radio Leicester, I think it was. So we put that on, and that was free to anybody to come in. I give this talk in various forms to people about the history of Palitoy. Sometimes it's about Pippa, sometimes it's about Action Man, it's about Star Wars, and people say, boy, you should write a book about this. So I've written the book. There it is. Being designed by Brian Hickey, who's written various toy books. That's one of them, the Action Force book. And if you want to get a copy, you just scan the QR code there and it'll take you through. So, and there's a shot, I think, of inside. Yeah, there's a mock-up of inside the book. That's Miles Fletcher and Harry Child, the sales manager, back in the 60s, looking at Bonanza, which we took. So that's what the book's going to look like inside. So I'll leave you with that. Thanks for listening. I hope it's been interesting. I hope you found it interesting about the history of Palitoy, because not many people know that. I've probably repeated a lot of things you do know about Star Wars, but you may have learned something. Thanks very much. I take questions, but you probably know more about Star Wars than me. Anybody got a question?
So when you did the work, you reworked the X-Wing and you reworked the land speed and fewer play sets.
Yeah.
At the same time, the TIE Fighter came out. Why wasn't that given a rework and the electronics removed? Did you look at doing that? That's something you looked at?
We probably looked at doing it, but I think it was we were able to borrow tooling off them to bring over to UK.
Yeah.
We probably found that when we got in contact with them that it was available at a particular time, so we could mould it.
Right.
But the other two, they wouldn't let us have those,
Okay.
the moulds for those, so we had to make our own.
That's probably why we didn't get the power for a couple of years as well.
Well, yeah, that was too expensive, the Falcon, for the first year. Remember, they were a bit nervous about putting this out into the market, trying to convince the trade to do Star Wars. It was very difficult. So that was left out the first year because of the high expense. But when we got it for the second year, I think, was it when it went in? 80 went in. That's when Chad Valley had it, wasn't it? In the catalogue, 80. So it was shown in that catalogue. They had a problem with the top of their Falcon. I think it was slow running or something like that. So they had to keep it in America to mould off enough for them. So Roger Morrison, the tournament manager, had to make a mould just for the top, and we borrowed the rest of it and then moulded it in companies in the West Midlands. Probably B Mouldings was one of them, and then shipped the stuff into Palitoy, and it was all assembled down the assembly line. Yeah.
One of the points that Bob touched on was that for the first release, the landscape at retail was completely different to how it is today, and it was mostly made up of independent shops. So the moment you're trying to get, and it still goes on now, the moment you're trying to get someone to like take a whole new line, take a punt on something that you have no kind of reference to, the more expensive it is, you're more likely to sort of like put the brakes on it. Whereas where you had like Woolworths and Boots, who are multi-site retailers, they've got the budgets to like, you know, take more of a gamble on these things. But like a family-owned toy shop, or someone member of like Toy Master, they'd just be like, whoa,
Yeah.
you know, not on top of everything else, I can't do that. So that was one of the considerations of like, well, we'll take it away. But once Star Wars was out there and it proved itself, everybody's like, yeah.
We did have a problem with some of the unusual characters, you know, because we were wanting to ship them cartons of stuff with these characters in them, and they didn't want them, you know. I mean, they're most expensive by now, aren't they, some of these characters?
Yeah, you had
They wanted loads of Luke Skywalker and Stormtroopers, but
you could order solid cases,
yeah,
and you'd had like assortments as well. So some of the things that you can see on records were you'd be getting solid cases of Darth Vader, but like they say, like a new assortment of figures, new release of figures, you order assortments rather than, you didn't know ones were going to be profit, but you knew everyone wanted a Darth Vader and everybody wanted like Luke. So you could, you know, in terms of the sales, people and every single one was available as a solid case, but I don't think that was necessarily always, you know, how a lot of the toy shops thought it. They spread the risk because not everything would sell through. So you'd Apple, you see, you want and you need them, isn't it? Yeah.
do as a sort of the art lounge. Yeah, because you understand retail more than me. I'm sort of passing on marketing knowledge, but I don't know much about it. I was a designer.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can see I've got some sales order forms.
Oh yeah.
And there's a wicked one where it was a returns form, and it was Klaatu, Reese, Squid Head, and the reason for that, and it was like about 240 each one. But the shop, the toy shop, just said bad mix of figures. That was the reason.
Sent them back.
Yeah, so sent them back because it's like, oh, I don't want those, you know, like because they felt that those ones.
No, a lot of those would go in the factory shop, which you'd have loved to go in the factory shop. You could go in the factory shop with a black bin liner, come out and pay a $5.
Come out with it.
Anything that was returns had the sticker of the company on, you know, the shop couldn't be sold again, so it'd go into factory shop. And some of those are quite expensive now with the shop sticker on.
I've got some Charlie's Angels ears, and it's on the back. It's like a rubber stamp saying factory shop.
Have you?
Yeah, on the back.
Yeah, and we never collected it. It was a job for us designing toys.